What's going on, everybody? This is Dr. Jim Cellini. I'm a board-certified practicing veterinary neurologist, and today's video is going to be a little bit different. This is going to be the first of a two-parter where I am reacting to myself and others providing testimony in New Hampshire to the state legislature in regards to a proposed bill called HB 1102. And the bill seeks to classify the sale and production of brachycephalic animals, meaning flat-faced animals like bulldogs, for instance. It seeks to classify that as animal cruelty. And obviously, this is a very broad-reaching and admittedly a little bit of a vague bill that I would describe my position as cautiously supporting. I certainly support it more than I oppose it. So I wanted to go up to New Hampshire. I was made aware of this meeting recently. And I wanted to go up to this hearing and provide some testimony and essentially try to provide some counter arguments to some of the all too common arguments that I see from breeders justifying the creation of dogs with extreme features. So if you don't like my voice or my face, you're going to get double of both of those today because I'm going to be reacting to myself talking a lot. But what I'm going to do is basically react to my testimony during this hearing. It was a little bit time compressed, and you'll see in the video the guy's holding up a sign of like yellow and red cards telling me to I've got 15 seconds left. And so I had to really get through my written statement. This part is going to be me reacting to myself and kind of clarifying my position and some of my statements to the committee members. And then part two next week is going to be me providing a counter argument to the breeders and the AKC representatives. Let's get started. Thank you.
Hi. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. My name is Dr. James Cellini. I am very nervous, by the way. I was fine until the moment I got up and I was like, huh. I started feeling like an adrenaline surge. So if I sound like I'm short of breath and I'm kind of like breathing fast, it's because I am very nervous during the beginning here. I didn't think I would be nervous, but I am. I've been a board-certified veterinary neurologist and neurosurgeon for about 7 years. I am. And a veterinarian since 2009. I sound so nervous. I'm currently licensed in Rhode Island, and overall, I am in support of Bill HB 1102 because it is my professional and personal belief that brachycephaly is the worst burden ever placed upon companion animals. It would be very easy for me to simply provide many examples of brachycephalic dog suffering that I've witnessed throughout my career. Just this last week, I performed spinal surgery on 3 French Bulldogs. I currently work at a very large 24/7 ER and specialty center in Rhode Island, and I've spent my career working only in facilities such as this across the country during my various stages of training. It would also be easy for me to simply state that I've never met a specialist or an emergency vet that doesn't share my view in relation to brachycephaly, which is that brachycephaly is by and large not in the best interest of the animal and leads to a tremendous amount of morbidity and mortality. The problem, though, with simply showing cases of these dogs suffering is that those who support the creation of brachycephalic pets, such as breeders, can simply always default to a common argument, which is that only poorly bred brachycephalic dogs suffer. By shifting the blame onto backyard breeders or unethical breeders, terms which have no real consistent definition, brachycephalic dog and cat breeders are able to absolve themselves from the truth of the matter, which is that brachycephaly is intentional malformed anatomy that greatly reduces the quality of life of a significant portion of those dogs that suffer from it. Okay, so I'm going to stop it right there. Just to clarify what I'm trying to say here. Brachycephaly refers to the shape of a dog's skull. It means the skull and the face is broad and flat. Think of like French Bulldogs and English Bulldogs having smush faces, pugs, breeds like that. That's what we're talking about here is brachycephalic animals. My position, and we'll get into that why I think this, is that creating this anatomical variant brings about way, way, way too much harm to dogs and cats than it does any benefit. And what I'm touching on in regards to the breeders, they too often will say that, well, the sick ones are just unethically bred. But as you'll see coming up, the breed standard actually encourages these extreme features, which lead to disease. So we'll keep going. I'd like to reference the breed standards from 4 of the more popular dog breeds according to the AKC, the Frenchie, the English Bulldog, the Boston Terrier, and the Pug. The breed clubs of all 4 of these breeds describe a breed standard that calls for severe brachycephaly. In the French Bulldog, they list a extremely short nose. The English Bulldog lists extremely short face and muzzle, and the Boston Terrier literally shows a correct more brachycephalic example versus an incorrect, less brachycephalic example. They have it backwards. There are likely going to be many who oppose this bill while using the argument that not all brachycephalic animals suffer. Many dog owners and breed enthusiasts like to show their dogs running, agility training, and being very active in general as evidence that being brachycephalic doesn't necessarily mean you're suffering. This completely misses the point. First of all, research has shown that by and large, the public does not recognize many of the symptoms of distress that these breeds show, and they're in fact encouraged as some sort of quirky behavior inherent to the breed. I'm referring to snorting, snoring, and overall loud breathing considered normal for these breeds. Secondly, no one on my side of the argument, to my knowledge, is arguing that 100% of brachycephalic dogs are miserable and in pain 24/7. The fact of the matter is that when you strive to create a dog whose breed standard is an anatomical malformation, you may manage to create many dogs who overcome their disability and appear outwardly happy and healthy, but you will also create many dogs who suffer a lifetime of difficulty breathing, chronic pain, and immobility. It is both the pursuit of a faulty standard and the standard itself that should either change or stop, in my opinion.
So I'll stop right there again. So again, what my argument basically is in regards to this specific hearing is that the breed standards for many of these brachycephalic animals, I mentioned French Bulldogs, English Bulldogs, pugs, Boston Terriers, in the breed standard, they instruct people that the standard is an extreme malformation of these dogs' face and skull. Okay. They show or they write down descriptions of extremely short noses. And we know from research, which I'll mention here in a minute, that as you shorten the muzzle in dogs, as the muzzle gets shorter, that has serious ramifications on their overall health and well-being.
I'd like to also address the notion, if I may, that there is no evidence to support brachycephaly being inherently bad for an animal's health. I'd like to refer anyone interested in researching this to a website called PubMed, where you can type in the words brachycephaly dog and immediately have access to dozens of research articles investigating brachycephaly. I would also like to point out that the term brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome, or BOAS for short, starts with the word brachycephalic. It is essentially exclusive to these dogs with that confirmation.
So you'll hear the word BOAS a lot in this conversation, especially when the legislatures start asking me questions. BOAS refers to brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome. And basically, this is a spectrum of disease that results because as a dog's muzzle squishes like an accordion or a panini press sandwich, the soft tissues inside all of that compressed bone, they don't scale down to the proportions that they need to. So all that soft tissue gets crammed into a very, shrunken cavity. And the end result is that air can't get from the outside down the airway and into the lungs. The airflow is really turbulent and it's blocked by all that soft tissue. So that's why you see bulldogs doing that all the time, because they're literally trying to force air into their airway because they can't do it normally. That's what brachycephalic obstructive airway syndrome is. It's BOAS. And it is very oftentimes life-threatening. And if it's not life-threatening, it's very much life-altering because, as you can imagine, you'd be miserable if you walked around your entire life, unable to get oxygen into your lungs without anything less than like maximum effort on your part. So it's completely like misery for the pets that suffer from it.
The breed standards are the disease. I could go on and on about how brachycephaly.
So I'm going to stop one real quick. If there's a take-home message from my opinion on this matter, it's that the breed standards for, let's say, the French Bulldog, the English Bulldog, the breed standards are a disease. They encourage you to make a dog with no nose, no muzzle, and that in and of itself is not 100% of the time, but a very, very high percentage of the time. We're talking like 50 to 90% of the time, depending on what paper you read, results in this BOAS condition. So the breed standard is a disease. I can't stress that enough.
In boxers, Boston Terriers, and Bulldogs is linked to a much higher risk of malignant brain cancer. I could also go on about the spinal malformations that are literally built into French and English Bulldogs and Boston Terriers, thanks to the disheveled 2 genetic variant, or how French Bulldogs frequently die from a herniated disc, or the horrific skull morphologies of Persian cats, or the fact that brachycephalic dogs have significantly shorter lifespans and are 4 times more expensive to insure for their pet owners.
Okay, your time is up.
Okay, so this was kind of hard because they were holding up pieces of paper to tell me to stop talking. And in my head, I basically was just like, you know what, I'm going to go for it. And I tried to read as fast as I could and enunciate everything as well as I could. But I didn't get to my entire statement. I left, I think, a paragraph or two out at the bottom. So I'll link my entire statement in the description, just so you can read like my formal position here. But they had to cut me off because they're only giving you like 3 minutes to talk. And I thought it was more like 5 to 7 minutes. So they made everything really short and they cut me off. They actually let me go a lot longer than some of the other people because I think they were maybe getting some value, hopefully, out of what I was saying. Yeah, you kind of heard me like speaking really fast and trying to like get through it really fast. And that's because I kept like seeing like it's turning yellow and then red. I felt like a comedian getting the light and getting booted off stage, which is probably what would happen if I tried stand-up comedy anyway.
Can we have a copy of your testimony? Do
Sure.
you have? Mhm.
You want to know?
Yeah, sure. Are there, Representative Bixby, we have questions also to you.
All right, so here's where the legislature started asking me questions. I was a little bit, I mean, I've never done this before, right? I was a little bit unprepared, admittedly, just because like I didn't know what they were going to ask me. And I thought what they were going to ask me was more just going to be like yes or no questions. So you'll see the first question the guy gets at is a really weird, straightforward, and like deceptively simple question that I thought was going to be more of a gotcha moment. But in retrospect, I'm not really sure what he was getting at. You'll see what I mean right here.
Yeah, so I was wondering if brachycephalic breeds tend to exhibit higher levels of corticosteroids.
Higher, I don't know.
Okay, because which corticosteroids are of course a stress hormone. So
Okay.
are you're aware of that, right?
Of what a corticosteroid is?
Yes.
Yes.
I had no idea what he was trying to get at here. What I should have said in retrospect is that I don't know the specific study or if there is one that demonstrates high stress hormones in brachycephalic animals. But if a study found one and found that they had higher stress hormones, I wouldn't be surprised at all by that finding. I just thought he was looking for a yes, no. So I just said, no, I don't know. And then I think that made him get a little defensive. Then he asked me, like, you are aware of what corticosteroids are? It's like, yes, dude, I know what corticosteroids are. Like, and I was just kind of like, okay. So the first question, not my best work, but let's keep going.
Yes, and that they're associated with higher levels of stress.
Okay.
And you see, I'm just like, okay.
Representative Potenza.
So my question is about the insurance piece, because someone spoke about that earlier. We got a lot of testimony, of course, pro and con in regards with this. And pretty much I know this from a friend of mine that they had pet insurance and they had to spend about, I don't know, $7,000 out of pocket. Some was covered by insurance for their surgery that happened to their pug. But so can you speak to that just a little bit about, because pet insurance should be a given, especially when you're spending a lot of money on a dog. So
I'll stop before I get into my answer. I was expecting these kind of like more yes, no questions, but what they ended up wanting me to do, they wanted to like introduce a topic to me and they wanted me to just kind of expand on something for like a minute or so. And I wasn't quite catching that. And you see in the first couple of questions, I'm listening to them and I'm trying to like figure out what they're getting to. And I have this bad habit. I need to stop it where if I know what you're getting to, I'll just cut you off and start like answering your question rather than letting it finish. And that led to a little bit of awkward, like back and forth. I felt like watching this now in retrospect, I should have just let them completely finish their sentence, absorbed what they were saying, and then like carefully responded. But like the adrenaline, the corticosteroids, the stress hormones in my bloodstream were really at like max. And I was trying to just like not say anything stupid and make a fool out of myself. So that kind of overrode a little bit of my normal like conversational mannerisms. Anyway, so here's my answer to that question.
Yeah. So I cited that data from a paper study published in the Vet Record Journal in 2020. I think the bigger issue, are you asking like, should owners just be aware of pet insurance for these dogs?
no, just like
I'm sorry.
the automatically pet insurance is not covering,
Right.
they're not covering for these surgeries or.
So what she wants me to talk about is just the simple fact that pet insurance companies are starting to not cover conditions for a lot of these animals because they're just considering them pre-existing conditions right off the bat. So people are getting stuck with like $8,000 bills that they think health insurance is going to pay for, pet insurance is going to pay for, but it turns out they don't. And so I think that's what she's wanting me to talk
I'm
about.
hearing that more and more from clients because the pet insurance companies are getting wise to the fact that they are having to shell out 5-figure reimbursements to people for these pets. And they are thus hiking their premiums in the first place. If you look on any pet insurance premium aggregate website, you'll see that these animals have the highest premiums, way disproportional to their size. And a lot of pet insurance companies are no longer covering things because they happen so frequently in these dogs. They're just viewing them as inherent parts of the dog, more or less. And so they're declining coverage.
Haskins, Representative Haskins, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question. Do you have access to information that would help us determine why this is controversial among animal breeders who obviously love their animals and some have studied their breed, and yet there's a contradiction here at hand that we have to deal with as to whether or not brachycephaly is actually a deformity.
Right.
Could you speak to that?
So you see me again, I'm kind of like trying to figure out what, I thought the questions they would ask would be less open-ended. And so I'm trying to like process through a bunch of stress hormones surging through my body, like what her specific question is, but it's actually not a specific one. She just wants me to broadly talk about like why breeders are hesitant to call this a malformation.
Why breeders are hesitant?
Why is it a deformity in your view when it's just
Okay. So for one, I'm not aware of any instance in nature where brachycephaly just pops up and it's part of an animal's being. I mean, where do you see this? Anywhere.
Now, what I should have clarified here, again, I don't know if brachycephaly pops up in nature, at least anywhere near the degree of like bulldogs and pugs, let's say. Okay. And what I should have added here is that even if it did, then it arrived there by natural selection and evolution. Okay. Whereas dog brachycephaly arose today through artificial selection and inbreeding over hundreds of years. That is what I should have said at the time to clarify this. I think a better thing that I could have said would be to say, in nature, where do you ever see wild dogs have brachycephaly? Literally never. Or wolves, right? Literally never. From my end, if I'm going to make a comparison, like, where do you see this in nature? I should try to compare it to animals in nature that are wild canids, like wild dogs, rather than like any animal whatsoever, because it leaves it too open for anybody to be like, oh, but there's brachycephaly in some bullfrog that is in South America. You know what I mean? So I could have done a better job at this.
The fact remains that this has been artificially selected for decades, if not maybe like a couple hundred thousands of years by now. In my opinion, I think breeders are hesitant to change because it's hard to find the genetic diversity within these breeds to do that. If you set out to say, okay, I want to make 2 French Bulldogs breed and produce puppies that are less brachycephalic, but all I can find is French Bulldogs that are currently brachycephalic, you're going to have great difficulty in doing that. And you're left with the situation of what's called outcrossing, where you basically mix breeds together and try to change the entire shape of the dog. But breeders, I think, don't want to do that because then they're making dogs that are not the breed standard, and they face a lot of criticism from other breeders who then will blast them across social media and wherever else and say, you're making poor examples of XYZ breed. And they face a lot of, peer pressure, I think, from what I've seen that way.
She asked me, why are breeders hesitant to consider a flat face brachycephaly as a malformation? And I think the reason is, which I'll get into more in a second here, is the breed standards. As I mentioned earlier on, the breed standards call for these extremes. So if you're a breeder and you're wanting to make the dog as close to the breed standard because you've been told and your peers tell you that the breed standard, this is the standard. If that's an extreme feature, you're going to just ignore the fact that it's an extreme feature and just make dogs according to the breed standard. It's almost like if you're sailing towards a North Star that actually is in the wrong direction, you're going to keep sailing in the wrong direction because the North Star is just not where it should be. Something like that, right?
So, I think it's hard to hear, the thing I've been making and nurturing in my mind for many years and in many generations in my family is perhaps, not in the best interest of the overall dog population as a whole. I think that's hard news to take a lot of the time.
Thank you.
Representative Murray.
Yeah, and just trying to level with the breeders here. It's difficult to be doing something in many generations in your family in some instances. Like oftentimes breeders bond with their kids over dog breeding, and it's like a familial thing to them. It's part of who you are. And for people like me to stroll into town and academic researchers in an ivory tower, decrying all these problems. Yes, the problems are important and need to be addressed. I'm not denying that, but you got to put yourself in their shoes a little bit too. Like all of a sudden it's like, wait a second, what I've been doing is horrible and like cruel. This is breaking news to me, So, it's just, if you're them, it's kind of hard to hear. Like I said,
Thank you for taking my question. Another question that I had was we've spent a lot of time around the condition of brachycephaly, but are there other conditions that
brachycephaly.
you treat that you? I'm looking at the
Yes.
inclusion of this lens. Thank you. If I may follow
Sure.
up.
Yeah.
So sorry. I apologize to this representative. Again, my adrenaline got pumping and I started thinking of what her question was going to be, and I jumped to the end of it and I just blurted out a yes or no. So I should not have done that. And if I ever do this again, I'll be better about stuff like this, but I should not have interrupted her like that. So I apologize to the representative. I did that too, formally.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so how does one interpret, if we were looking at lines 4, 5, and 6, which conditions would be included in addition to brachycephaly if this were to be interpreted legally?
You're referring to the bill itself?
Correct.
Okay. Can I see? I don't remember what lines 4, 5, and 6 say.
There are copies
Okay.
on the table there.
I can just read it if you want. It's 2 lines.
So what this representative is getting at is the bill itself and how way too broad reaching and kind of vague it is. And she wants me to talk about like, could other malformations and other problems dogs have be lumped into this as well?
4, 5, and 6, and the interpretation of a birth deformity that causes suffering, such as, and it mentions one condition, but you are.
Yeah. I mean, you could name many deformities, that dogs suffer from as congenital malformations. I mean, hydrocephalus, spinal kyphosis, syringomyelia in cavaliers. I mean, I could literally just, you can find a book and just start naming them. I do, and that gets into, I think from, you all's perspective, a little bit of a hairy situation as far as like how to approve these sorts of things, like why stop here and that sort of question. What I will say is that I think brachycephaly is probably a good starting point, because if you pay attention to like the 80-20 rule in theory, brachycephaly, I think, is going to be responsible for more of the health problems than anything else, by and large. Is it the single worst thing that could be malformed about a dog? Not always, but the sheer number of these pets times how much it affects them, I think, produces a value that probably will be the most rewarding to tackle as a whole.
So what I'm trying to explain right there, I'm trying to do a math equation in my head. Say you have a population of dogs and they suffer a lot, and you could quantify the amount of suffering that they have. If there's only a very small number of dogs, but they suffer a lot, you've got a lot of suffering quantified as a number times a small number of their population. The reason I think brachycephaly is a good place to start with bills addressing breeding and animal cruelty is because if you use that same equation, there are a ton of dogs that are brachycephalic. The French Bulldog is the most popular dog breed in America, and it's been shooting straight up the last few years. You have so many brachycephalic dogs, and so many of them suffer, that if you multiply those two, again, if there were numbers, those two numbers together, you get the biggest number. And thus, if you tackle that problem and reduce that number, you'll get the most gain in animal welfare. Does that make sense? I'm trying to make this like a multiplication problem in order to like numerically solve it and justify tackling brachycephaly as a problem.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking my question. So I have my kind of go-to vet in my community that I always reach out to on these issues for her advice, and she was very sympathetic to this bill. But her concern that I wish to ask you about has to do with the part of the bill that you now have in front of you that refers to the same birth deformity that causes suffering. And the question of her concern was, you know, when she sees dogs, even as they're diagnosed with BOAS, it's on a scale from 1 to 4.
Right.
So how would you envision, as a practicing veterinarian, something like this being implemented? Because it's one thing to understand the purpose of it. It's another thing to say, when we're trying to judge suffering as the qualifier for whether or not animals should be bred, how in your mind might something like this actually be implemented?
I would use the I believe it was out of the Cambridge, the BOAS grading scale. And basically I think the guidelines overseas is to breed only grade 0 or 1 dogs together. And I think that is a good guideline to start with. However, as a neurologist, I'm a little bit biased because, you know, I actually don't, I only deal with the neurologic aspect of these breeds, which I see almost every day. And I do think that the disheveled 2 variant in these breeds does not get talked about enough. Studies have shown that this is fixed in French English Bulldogs, and I believe Boston Terrier or pugs. But definitely French and English Bulldogs. I think ridding the breed of also that spinal malformation is equally as important as ridding them of this BOAS prevalence.
It's very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Creighton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for your testimony. I'm going to put you in the fight right now in the family. My daughter's a vet, and one of my best friends.
So just be prepared. I think I did okay with that one because it was a pretty straightforward answer. I think using a BOAS grading system like they do from Cambridge, the functional grading scale of 0 to 4 makes the most sense as far as like screening 2 dogs to breed with each other, because that actually identifies a problem, this BOAS problem. And I think that's better language to use in the bill rather than just saying if they're brachycephalic, because again, not every single brachycephalic dog has an airway issue, right? Now again, here, I'll just play it.
And one of my best friends is a vet, and they're on both sides of this issue.
Sure.
So
Can I ask you a question real quick? Are they on the side that the bill just has faulty language, or are they on the side that brachycephaly is okay?
my daughter,
I am cringing at myself for interrupting him because I should have just let him talk. Again, I'm the one that's nervous, and I'm just like blurting out things to try to like figure out his question too soon. And I really hate listening to myself do this. I'm sorry. All right.
daughter, 45 minutes, ripped my ear off. It's got to pass.
It's got to pass. It's got to pass. It will not pass.
My best friend it can't pass.
Okay.
So
yeah,
here I am. Here you are. My question though is really to the concept that breeders can take care of this.
right.
And that's the argument from the vet that said leave it alone.
Right. I think the best answer to that is just look at the breed standards. The breed standards show, and they call for dogs with extremely short noses. If that is your North Star to create a dog, you're going to create dogs as extremely short nosed as you can as part of building this population. And if you're going to do that, yes, very many will overcome that disability, like I said in my statement, but you're going to have collateral damage in the form of just swaths of dogs as a result of this practice that are suffering from sometimes day one. Okay. And I think one of the biggest things that could change would be the breed clubs changing the language and stop. I think what the AKC rep was talking about, Boston Terrier breed standard. You can look it up right now. The breed standard shows a correct brachycephalic dog and an incorrect, less brachycephalic dog. The muzzle is longer, and they call it incorrect. So if you're a breeder and you want to make these dogs, you're going to look at that and think, well, I want to make the correct one, but that means everything's going like this with the muzzle. So I think that's probably the best place to start.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yep.
I think I did okay there, even though I interrupted him before he finished his question. Sorry to that representative as well. I'm just hearing my brothers right now be like,
Dude, you always do this.
it's so frustrating. Personality flaws, am I right? So he's asking basically, let the breeders figure this out. Well, A, they haven't figured it out yet. They kind of got us in this situation in the first place, like if we're being honest. B, their breed standard calls for extreme features, so they're never going to get us out of this if they're following that breed standard.
I love Representative Creighton's question because it's kind of like where I'm at. How can we legislate this? I think it's almost impossible. But the two other, the woman from the AKC and then the other woman that's sitting next to her, their testimonies were really powerful. So
in my opinion, they were not really powerful. In my opinion, they had an enormous amount of holes in their arguments. And again, in the second video I'm going to respond to those, in my opinion, very faulty arguments. But we'll shelf that for now.
And I'm here looking at this chart that has, says, okay, if we want to not have, the BOA's problem, this is where you would breed. So you're saying, is this not being followed by the breeders right now?
I think it's contradictory because research has also shown that the shorter that a muzzle gets, the higher the risk exponentially of BOAs happening. That is disputed amongst the breeders, but that and another study is misinterpreted as counteracting the study that showed a very clear relationship across all dogs. As the muzzle goes like this, the risk of BOAs goes like that on a graph. Okay. I think it's contradictory because on the one hand, they're encouraging that, but then they show you a picture of a dog with no nose on their breed standard website. So I don't know how to make sense of that. How could you?
I think I did okay there. I think I basically pointed out what I've been saying, which is, she's like, are you saying the breeders aren't taking care of this, even though they have a functional grading system here to pay attention to? And my answer is, yeah, that's great. They're doing some work to acknowledge this problem, but they're also encouraging extreme features at the same time. And these ideas do not mesh well together. It just doesn't work.
And yes, thank you. One question. This is clarification because we've had, to me, conflicting testimony today on the definition of brachycephalic. Brachycephalic, yes, sir. Thank you. As a medical condition or just a description of a flat face?
It's a description of the skull.
Okay.
Mhm.
And that description.
It's like saying round, like how round is something.
Okay.
Right.
Thank you.
There's a lot of discussion as far as defining brachycephaly. The legislatures, for some reason, had a really hard time trying to tease out that brachycephaly means the shape of a dog's skull, but not a disease. So what I'm trying to say is that brachycephaly is not always 100% of the time necessarily a disease, but it brings about an enormous risk of severe disease. Does that make sense? It's like creating a dog who, by its shape, is automatically at risk for a lifetime of suffering. That's basically what we're saying.
Okay. Any other questions? Thank you for your testimony, sir.
Yep.
Oh, Representative Comtois, I'm sorry.
Okay, she had the biggest problem with me, I think, as you'll see right here. But she actually kind of throws me off a little bit. And in retrospect, this is the one question I wish I could go back and re-answer. So let's get into it.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking my question.
Sorry.
As I sit here and I listen to, and Representative Creighton just clarified one thing along with your answer. Brachycephalic is a description. It is not a medical condition.
Brachycephalic. Yep.
Is that correct?
Yes.
I just heard testimony, and I don't know if it's correct, but the breed Pekingese was discussed briefly, and that standard hasn't, my understanding was it's over 1,000 years old.
Now, I didn't want to, I was actually learning my lesson. I didn't want to interrupt her, but simply being 1,000 years old doesn't mean that it's correct. I don't know why she's defaulting to something being 1,000 years old as like, oh, they got it 1,000 years ago. That doesn't mean anything.
But they would be considered brachycephalic, right?
I believe they are, yes.
Okay. Now, why would we legislate something on a breed that is over 1,000 years old, that we haven't heard anything going on with regards to, I mean, we've been talking about a lot of breeds, but Pekingese is also one of these breeds. What is your
I don't know if she has a Pekingese and she just likes the breed. I don't know why she's bringing that breed up. I have all these questions going through my head, and I'm trying to answer those questions that I'm creating for myself, and I'm not absorbing what she's trying to say very well.
What is your suggestion, and what do we do with all of these animals if we're going to legislate that these people really can't breed again because they're a brachycephalic breed? I'm just asking.
Well, I think that
So again, the issue she's getting at is the admitted flaw in the bill, which is that it's too broad reaching and too vague. It simply says all brachycephaly of any kind is now illegal because it's considered animal cruelty. So what I should have said is I actually agree with her. Like, that's a little bit too broad of a bill to make.
that if you start, the question is like in a theoretical world, how to start this process of unwinding the severe extreme features. I would think there would have to be some sort of grace period to say, okay, you have X amount of time to start unwinding this process. So that, initially all we have are brachycephalic dogs in many cases. So like, what else are we going to breed them to, right? So I think they need time to demonstrate, are we making progress and headway here? And I think a lot of good faith, as I've said before, a lot of kind of good faith towards that would be the breed clubs changing what they are recommending and showing as primary examples of these pets. I'd also like to bring up the fact that there's varying degrees of brachycephaly. So like some people mention boxers as a breed and lump them in with French and English bulldogs and say, well, they're brachycephalic. Why they don't have these? If you look at boxers, how many boxers have you seen who have completely no face whatsoever? There's degrees to this condition too. And that's why I use the analogy that it's like calling something round, because, a soccer ball is not a perfect sphere, but you would describe it as round in general, right? Having said that, boxers are a much elevated risk for malignant brain cancer, and that is directly related to the genes that confer brachycephaly onto them. So the genes that change the shape of their skull have other ramifications outside of just.
I kind of started to ramble there because I wasn't sure the question I was even answering in the first place. Because again, the question came at me and I kind of had I should have just said, like, can you be more specific, please? I think that's what you should say when you're giving testimony like this. So I had like too many thoughts and issues coming into my head all at once. And that was a little bit of a word salad on my part. What I think she's just trying to say is, like, what do we do with these dogs? And what I should have defaulted to was focusing on the breed standard changing again, because again, that's what I think should happen. And what I should also focus on, or what I should have said, is the bill needs to contain language that instead of including all brachycephalic animals, it simply includes brachycephalic animals that are clinically affected in regards to BOAS or spinal malformations, things of that nature. I think that is what she was kind of getting at in retrospect.
Thank you. But couldn't that be true of any breed?
True of.
Well, I mean, any breed can pass on genetic or deformity. I know that at one point I had a breed. I had to make sure I got a hip dysplasia certificate to say that they were free and clear of that, and that my dog would replace because it is a genetic deformity or genetic defect in that particular breed. It was my choice to buy from the breeder, who I thought was very upfront and honest with me, and I had a wonderful animal.
Right.
There are other breeds that are subjective to cancer genes. Now,
what specific cancer gene?
well, I'm not sure, I'm not a veterinarian, but
I kind of liked saying this, to be honest with you, because I think she is also doing like a word salad back at me. And she's like, well, other breeds are predisposed to cancer genes. Again, saying breeds get cancer is not the same thing as saying they're being born with a malformation right off the bat inherently.
But genetically, even as humans, we are predisposed by our parents, okay, to get genetic defects or abnormalities. This can happen in any breed of dog, not just the brachycephaly. So what is your answer to combating all of these?
Well, for one, I think this is a false equivalency. I don't think that referring to other breeds like, let's say, Bernese Mountain Dogs, and they're massively overrepresented for a malignant cancer that is incurable. And their lifespan in some studies are reported as 6 to 8 years. And they die of this called malignant histiocytosis. Okay. Um, that cancer, if you could identify a single genetic test to say, okay, this dog is going to demonstrate this cancer, I promise you, everybody would be on board with saying, okay, yeah, let's get this out of the breed.
What I should have said in retrospect is that she's comparing cancer to a congenital birth defect. Okay. Would be like comparing a person that gets colorectal cancer when they're 70 to a baby born with hydrocephalus. The only things those two things share in common are that they can be called disease. I think she's trying to connect two very different diseases and make it seem like they are the same thing, thus none of it should be banned or legislated against in any way. If I had to do this over again, that's what I would say rather than what I'm saying right here.
The problem is you cannot, at least to my knowledge, currently do that. And you have to wait until the dog is about 7 or 8 years old to develop the cancer many times. They develop these problems after they've reproduced. Okay. Whereas many of these dogs who are brachycephalic will demonstrate these problems before they reproduce, or they are simply born with a shape that we know puts them at risk for it.
So you see, that's what I'm trying to say is like the difference is, having a disease later in life that you can't predict and can't test for versus knowing what you're going to predispose animals to when you breed them.
So I think the question is, what can we identify to fix? And you mentioned the BOAS grading scale, and simply visually inspecting the two parents of any potential offspring. I think would be much easier than trying to say, are these dogs going to end up producing cancer in 8 years after they're born?
Representative Bixby.
Yeah, so one of the things I'm struggling with is that we have before us two different things. We have a problem, which you have documented fairly well, that there are certain diseases that or physiological problems that come with brachycephalic dogs.
This is the guy that hit me with the corticosteroid question right off the bat, and he kind of comes around a little bit here near the end. I'll let you see my response, but I kind of give it back to him a little bit.
Not 100%, but with a certain degree of predictability. And we also have before us a bill, and what the bill does is make the selling or breeding of such dogs and animal cruelty of an equivalent to negligently failing to feed your animals, or negligently causing other sorts of suffering to your animals. I'm not going to go through the whole list,
Sure.
but so what we're looking at is a list of cruelty behaviors that are generally policed by local law enforcement or local animal control officers, and I'm wondering how that the enforcement system that we have for someone who is hoarding animals is going to be effective for dealing with problems that have to do with, let's say, errors of judgment in breeding, or
Right.
errors of systemic practice in breeding. I'm not sure how this bill is actually going to effectively address what seems to be a systemic problem in patterns of breeding.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like that's more of a it'll sound crass. It's more of a you problem than a my problem. But no, I hear what you're saying. That makes perfect sense. Like, how do we use what we have now to enforce this? I would say I would not rely on anything other than a veterinarian. And if you really want to be precise and fair and balanced, you should have a specialist veterinarian, such as a board certified surgeon or an internist or an anesthesiologist, neurologist. One of these types of people assess potential breed stock and make that conclusion. And you probably should wait until a certain age to assess them in the first place.
So again, just to summarize my view here, if we are going to pass legislation to control and regulate the breeding of brachycephalic animals, I think before two brachycephalic dogs breed together, they need to be fully assessed in regards to their BOAS grading scheme, like I mentioned before. We need to make sure that we wait a number of years, usually I think until the age of 3 to 5, I think is what Cambridge recommends. I'd have to double check on that. But somewhere around young adulthood, we should wait to see if they develop the condition. And I think we should have probably more than one specialist vet examine and evaluate things like radiographs, the BOAS grading, their gait, things of that nature, to make sure that they are free of these maladies before reproducing.
I don't know if this is even within the realm of possibility, but would it make more sense, rather than having this in the criminal code, to impose some sort of legal regulation on the way that breed standards are created?
I think that's a decent idea. Yeah. I could get my head around that.
Yeah. Again, I totally support any legislation that changes the breed standards for these dogs to make them less extreme, as I've illustrated previously. All right. So that's it. My first testimony in a legislative body. I don't even know if that's the right word. So I hope this clarified some of my views in regards to brachycephalic animal welfare. I've been thinking about this more and more lately. I've done a lot more of this type of content on other platforms like TikTok, but I may start making more content that talks about specifically the diseases that dogs like French Bulldogs, for instance, get and suffer from, that occur as a direct result of their breed standard and their shape. Okay, their brachycephaly. I hope you guys enjoyed this reaction to my testimony. Again, this was a lot of me today. The next video I'm going to do is I'm going to react to the testimony from some of the breeders and the AKC representative that was here, because I think their arguments have a lot of holes to be punched into them. Let's just say. Leave a comment below if you agree with what I'm thinking, or if you disagree. Feel free to start a conversation with me. Hit the like and subscribe button. Help grow the channel, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.